there's a lot of people who choose to leave this world. There's a lot of people who choose to overuse their prescription drugs or go to off the market drug use. And it seems to be rising, those numbers. And I'd like to see some more alternative ways for healthcare and alternative ways for people to enter society, but in a society that is different than the ones we are talking about now, about the stress of the economy and taxes and what it takes to pay rent. I think there's a lot of people who would love to live frugally on some vacant fields on farms. We want to grow the population, it sounds like. I hear that a lot, and I'm worried about the build, baby, build mentality. I think it's not going to serve or solve the problems that are growing with drug use and people that choose to take their lives. They want an alternative. So I hope we see some pilot projects that are creative and different than having to hold a 9-to-5, something different. People will live frugally and maybe live better.
So does anyone want to respond to that comment, or?
Well, certainly we've faced, and I really want to applaud Governor Shumlin for bringing up the opiate crisis, which is actually not just a crisis here in Vermont. It's clearly been a crisis in states throughout the country. And, we have to face our problems. And I think a lot of kudos goes to the governor for bringing that issue to the surface so that we can try to face it. On the other hand, we've woefully under-faced it. We still have a 1-year waiting list, give or take, in Burlington. Throughout the state, there are folks who are waiting, and they come to get help, and we say, oh, we'd like to help you, but you have to wait 3 months or 6 months. Could you come back? And that opportunity, those folks who are down in that hole aren't necessarily going to resurface for help in the future. So I would like to see us put more investment into our drug treatment programs, but also into prevention and education, and ultimately do that through, oddly enough, funding and shifting our policy around cannabis, and actually bring that whole world of cannabis above board, where it's less harmful than alcohol, frankly, in our society, and we could put the resources towards prevention, treatment, education, law enforcement, and then ultimately also have money for investment, whether it's rural broadband or weatherization or higher education, because the real problem around drugs actually, I think, stems from people not really having hope, people struggling to meet their bills, people struggling to give their children one gift at Christmas because they can't afford their electric bills. When people are unhappy, and when our TV world says, just take a pill or take drugs and you'll get better from any problem that you have, we have a real societal problem, and we need to address it through both the prescription drug marketing world, the prescription drug world where people get tons of opiates for painkillers that then they become hooked on, but also through hope, through adjusting our economic system so that people actually have more vibrancy in their lives going forward and don't turn to drugs to get away from their problems.
Well, I want to thank Ibnar for the question. It was brave, it took a lot of courage, and really appreciate it. And I would just start by saying I think there's 3 ways one could respond to this question, and probably more. And I sometimes think of the quote, it's no measure of health to adjust to a profoundly sick society, that people are facing some intense struggles and often feel alone. And so if anybody at home is feeling that way, get the resources you need, reach out to somebody, let somebody know how you're feeling. And that's sometimes the most important thing we can do. And I've talked to a lot of teens about that. I was part of a roundtable on preventing teen suicide. And if folks don't know, we're next to a state like New York. They are 50th in teen suicide. We're actually 7th. And a lot of those are with guns or prescription drugs. And the access to prescription drugs and guns that we have in this state is really a twofold problem. And in some ways, it can be interrelated. There's a lot of drug trafficking into the state, a lot of gun trafficking out. And so we have to be focused on not just the ways that people are choosing to end their life, but the reasons behind that. And models that sometimes Montpelier can't come up with, but they can fund and they can support and they can give nonprofits and local community agencies the flexibility to really think holistically about how you bring elders and at-risk teens together, or how you create models that give people more access to the outdoors and open space. You know, I was visiting Jack Duffy at Valley Vista, he runs one of the largest treatment center in the state, and he said he believes 90% of the women who he works with who are addicted had sexual or domestic violence in their past that caused such trauma that they're having a really difficult time recovering. And I saw that every day at Women Helping Battered Women. And those are the kinds of things where we need to give our agencies the flexibility to really help people work through that trauma and any way we can to prevent that trauma.
Thank you.
So I heard the comment about sort of differently. I heard it as, you know, are we going to give people in the state of Vermont sort of different options about the way that they can live in society? And, you know, that's one of the reasons that my folks moved to Vermont in 1970. They were down in Fairfield County, Connecticut, and they wanted to come back to the land like so many people of that era did, because they saw in Vermont an alternative way to do things, that it wasn't the rat race that existed everywhere else. And I think we still have that opportunity, but we're facing a lot of difficulties. Many Vermonters are challenged with affordable housing even without a pressure on growth, our population growth. And so I think one of the things that we have to do as a state is make sure that we're allowing people to have the alternative opportunities that I think brought so many people into the state in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but also reinforce the infrastructure that's going to allow people to live here. And it's doing things like putting money into affordable housing so that people don't feel the pressure of housing costs. It is doing things like investing in land conservation and opportunities for our agricultural economy to grow. And those are things that have been priorities for me as Speaker of the House over the last 8 years. It's making sure that we have investments in people's drug treatment and things like that so that they can get well if they want to. These are all things that have to be priorities of the state, and I believe are, but we have more progress that we need to make.
Thank you. We'll take a call from our listeners.